I'm Amy Jo Martin. Welcome to the Why Not Now show. You know that thing you've been thinking about doing? Yeah, that one. Why not now? Have you ever actually taken the time to ask yourself, what's stopping me? Let's talk it through. This is your chance to give that idea the attention it deserves and take action. Each episode, I have a chat with a fascinating person, from entrepreneurs to athletes, celebrities, my parents, rocket scientists, and all walks of life. We talk through a critical time when they've asked themselves, why not now? We dissect that day or even that moment, step by step. Kate Fagan is on the show today. She's an ESPN sports reporter and author. She recently wrote a book titled What Made Maddie Run. After I read the book, I asked Kate to come on the show. The book's about a young woman named Madison Holleran. She was a college freshman that appeared to have it all. She was a University of Pennsylvania track athlete, a great student, and she had a ton of friends and family that loved her. Her life appeared to be perfect, according to her Instagram feed. That's why when Maddie's death by suicide shocked everyone around her, Kate dives into Maddie's story and sheds a different light on mental health. We talk through the role social media may have played, along with other factors. Kate helps us understand the struggle of young people suffering from mental illness today. Before we get started, let me fill you in on something that's been a lifesaver. It's called Design Pickle. Get it? You're in a pickle because you need a design ASAP, but you don't have the time or maybe even the skill to do it yourself. With Design Pickle, you pay a flat rate monthly fee of $370, and you're given a dedicated designer for all of your needs. And the first 14 days are risk-free. You get a full refund if you cancel in the first 2 weeks. For me, the process has been painless and ego-free. In fact, the Why Not Now posts you're seeing on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and everywhere else were created from my buddies at Design Pickle. I found I was spending so much time resizing images and trying to design things on my own. I didn't have the budget to hire a design firm or an agency, yet it was becoming too expensive for me to budget my own time. I'm now on a first-name basis with my designer. She's learned my style and we're in a groove. Why Not Now listeners get 30% off their first month. You can go to designpickle.com/why not now to redeem the offer. It's a great solution for entrepreneurs. A mentor once said to me, just because you can doesn't mean you should. Do what you're uniquely qualified to do. Design Pickle helps me do just that. Kate, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm excited to speak with you and definitely talk about the recent book that you wrote. Before we get started, can you tell me about a time when you had to ask yourself, why not now? And we'll dissect it.
Okay. So when I hear the question, why not now, the way my brain works is trying to think of times when I said yes to things that I was afraid of. And I would say that I'm actually really good at saying yes ahead of time to things that I'm afraid of and then just figuring it out. But if you want one particular time, and this is actually pretty recent, I went to the University of Colorado for school, and about a year ago, they asked me to be the commencement speaker. And I did not actually want to do it, nor think that I should do it, or think that I was capable of doing it. It just felt like it was a wrong time. And I didn't quite ask myself the question, why not now? But I really tried to analyze what it was about it that I was putting all the roadblocks in front of me. And then I realized that probably the only thing that I was going to have to do was just say yes to it and then figure it out as it came about. And so that's what I ended up doing.
So you had a feeling that the net was you should do it, but there were many kind of it sounds like hesitations, and so you're a say yes type of person and then figure it out as you need to. It sounds like.
Yeah, I mean that's worked well for me, is the saying yes. I remember when I was a couple years ago at ESPN, I was mostly a writer, and then Outside the Lines actually asked me to like fill in host. And I had to shadow someone the day before, and I was shadowing him all day. And then about 10 minutes before air, I was like, how did you feel the first time you ever had to do this? And he just said, terrified, really scared. And then I reminded myself how lucky I was that I was, 42 years old and was still doing things that gave me that feeling that we all once had, before like our first date and before first year of high school and before our first game and all of those things. So I think that really resonated with me about really embracing moments that actually, as you get older, can cause you a kind of nervousness, and embracing that as a gift to be had. And so that was partly also what motivated me to just say yes to doing a public speech that is not something that I really love to do or attempt to like seek out opportunities for. I only do them if somebody asks me. I don't go around being like, where can I talk and how can I capitalize on this?
It's really interesting because a lot of the why not now moments that I hear about from guests have to do with someone putting a mechanism in place that doesn't give themselves an out. And so in this case, it's kind of the yes, it's the agreeing, it sounds like for you, and then figuring it out or letting it kind of transpire as it should. But I love that notion that you just shared about it being a gift to have that fear, that can be flipped into a point of gratitude. It's a pretty cool way to look at it in perspective.
Also, I have a better why not now if we want to do that again at the end.
Okay, sure. No, it's all good.
Okay. So when I was about 26 or 27, I really, really wanted to cut my hair short again. And I say again because when I was a little kid and I played baseball growing up, I had gotten my hair cut short when I was in like first or second grade. And I got it cut short because I wanted to be like all my teammates. But it was actually once I got it cut short, my mom's reaction, like she was super upset. And everywhere we went there for the next couple of years, when I was a little kid, everybody would always say, at like the server at a restaurant, they'd be like, oh, do you and your son want to go to the table now? And I didn't really understand at the time, like how upsetting that should be, but I kind of saw the reactions from the adults with me that like this was an upsetting thing that shouldn't be happening. And so as I got older, it's like, of course, when you play college basketball, women's college basketball, like you're going to have your hair long because everybody's like desperately trying to, perform like femininity for everybody. So like nobody's gay here. Like we're all super girly. So like you always had your hair long in women's college basketball. So as I got older, like it started when I was 21, when I was out of college, like I really wanted to cut my hair short again because I thought it better embodied who I was, but I was deathly afraid of the reaction that had really embedded itself inside of me, like when I had done it as a little kid. Like I was really concerned about that anxiety that like that would then be my day in and day out, was like feeling that every time I went somewhere. And I mean, I lived with this for like 5 years of twice a year being like, I should cut my hair, but not now. Like I can't do it now. Like there'll be a time when I feel more secure and I should cut my hair. And then I remember there was a Gap ad with Selma Blair, and in it, she's kind of kneeling and her hair is pretty short, not crazy short, but pretty short. And it's really funky. And I remember seeing that picture and just being like, okay, fuck it. Like, this is exactly what I want my hair to look like. I've never seen a picture that looked exactly like I want it to look like. I'm going to do that cliched thing where I just walk into the hairdresser and I give him that picture and I ask him to cut my hair. And I think I was like 26 when I did that.
And how did you feel after?
I would love to say that it was just like, I did it. It's done. I'm rocking this haircut. But I felt a kind of freedom, but like, I would say overwhelming panic. Because even though people say this all the time, it's hair, it'll grow back. Like, after anyone gets a haircut, if they've ever had like a bad haircut when they were a kid, or it doesn't feel like them, it feels permanent. It feels really permanent right there in the moment. And so it was tough for me. And I knew it was right and I wasn't going to go back. And since then, I'm 35 now. So I've had my hair short for the last 7 or 8 years. But every single time I go to the hairdresser, I am really timid with the hairdresser. I'll be like, I want it cut, but like not a lot, like cut a little bit and then I'll approve it and then you can cut more because I feel like I'm 6 or 7 again. But yeah, like I really do. I can vividly remember when I got my haircut as a little kid. Like I remember the moment. I remember the car ride. I remember all of it. And I feel that way every time I go into a hairdresser. But so it wasn't freedom, and it still isn't freedom, because every time I get my haircut now, I get really nervous when I go to like the TSA and the airports, because they're really bad about misgendering people all the time, because they're just programmed through training, I'm assuming, to like identify everybody as like sir and ma'am, and they have no time to like actually look at anybody. They're just like, oh, short hair, sneakers. So I still have a lot of panic about it, but it's something that I will never grow my hair out long again, because I know that I would be doing that for someone else, not for me.
Oh. What was it about that ad or the moment that you saw Selma Blair in the Gap ad? That was your why not now moment, but was it just the right time? How did you so quickly make a decision because of that image?
I think it had been a number of years, right? So, but it was like, here's what I think it is I had just really started to take my writing seriously, because up until about 21, 22, it was like all I did was play basketball, though I had this like outside hope and belief that I would morph into a writer. And then I worked in newspapers for a little while, but like I didn't really understand how to be a good writer. I just was like showing up and happily writing with like no real instruction about how to get better. And I had just started to learn that writing was really about just like showing up and doing it, and not so much about like waiting for it to come to you. And I think that's kind of how I had been viewing the haircut, was that maybe my mom would come to me and say like, hey honey, like, I don't like, why would she ever do this? I don't know. Like because I talked to her about it. Like, I think you should get your haircut short again. I think I thought like someone would like hold my hand and walk me to the hairdresser.
Mm-hmm. Like there would be some perfect scenario or situation that would just kind of appear, and then the time would be right.
Exactly. And then I realized like that's not really, maybe occasionally that's how life works, but that's not really how life works. It's like you kind of have to show up and do the hard work, and then hopefully inspiration comes. And I think I kind of saw the Selma Blair thing, and I was learning about writing, and I was like, all right, I'm going to combine these two and just like get this done and do it.
Very cool. Wow. It's interesting to look back now and try to dissect your subconscious, because it's hard to explain sometimes, and to dig back in. But that's really interesting, actually. And now everyone will appreciate your short hair even more.
Yeah, I mean, they should totally check out my Instagram where I'm rocking my short haircut.
We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with Kate. We tackle the most taboo topics on the Why Not Now show. Oftentimes, you're hearing guests share things they've never shared before. In the spirit of things we don't typically talk about, you should know that the Why Not Now show is supported by Poo-Pourri. Yep, the original before you go toilet spray. It's magic. My friends at Poo-Pourri have literally taken the smell out of you-know-what. This pure blend of essential oils stops bathroom odor before it begins. Visit poopourri.com, and Why Not Now listeners get 20% off with code Why not now? That's all one word. I'm excited to dive into the book that just came out called What Made Maddie Run that you wrote. After reading it and then reaching out to you, I've been thinking a lot about the book itself and just the topic of depression and social media in our society. To not jump the gun here, can you share a little bit about the book and what made you write about Maddie's story?
The reason I was really drawn to Madison Holleran's story was because right from the moment I heard the news about her death, which was the day after, because there was a lot of headlines in the Philadelphia papers because she had gone to the University of Pennsylvania, right that next day, I saw a lot of overlaps with Madison's story and with my own story. And not to the extent of the mental health side of things, but really almost just the logistical side of things, being that I had lived in Philadelphia, and so I knew a lot of the places that she had been during her time there. I had been a runner in high school, though not a highly competitive one, but my sister had been a Division I runner at Dartmouth, also an Ivy League school. And I was always fascinated by the personality type and the perfectionism, the kind of type A that I had seen in a lot of the high-level runners that were in my sister's circle, especially coupled with high-performing academic institutions and how that affected human beings. And then the third thing was that when I had played basketball at the University of Colorado, I had desperately tried to quit my freshman year. The transition was so much more difficult than I thought it was going to be, than anybody had articulated to me. And I had taken a few steps that were not in any way down the line of where Maddie ended up going, but were clearly unhealthy steps in an attempt to avoid practices and to rearrange my situation at the University of Colorado. And so I thought, man, this is a really nuanced, layered story. And I feel like I have so many tent poles that would allow me to tell this story well. And so that was the first moment really in the day after reading those headlines where I thought, it's not going to be one of those stories I do in the next couple weeks and you turn around like a quick 800-word story about Madison Holler. And it was really something where I was like, this is going to be a couple years in the making. And that's even how long it took for us to do our magazine piece initially with ESPN. But that was really the origin point of my connection with that story.
There are so many alignments for you, and I had forgotten that Philadelphia tie after doing a little bit of research on you too, and how much you had covered that market and were a journalist for a long time too. There were two really big things that I took away from Maddie's story, and one was here we had this young woman who on the surface, looked like everything was great. And she's obviously very driven and kind of has her whole life kind of set up for her. And yet there was this depression that she was dealing with behind the scenes. And there really wasn't one thing, it seems, as I read through and really started to think about what you shared and you dove deep into so many different aspects of her scenario. There really didn't seem to be one thing that caused her to fall into deep depression. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think as a society, we want to peg that problem, right? And then attack it and talk about it. But that's just not the way it always goes. And so that was, I think, a really awesome takeaway to remind people that there isn't always just one thing that you can peg and say, okay, that's the problem, let's find a solution.
Yeah, and I think since the book has come out, I actually think that simple fact that there isn't a why or some sort of conclusion has irked some people who read the book because their takeaway perhaps isn't as nuanced as yours, which is maybe the larger point here isn't that there's a why, and we might not find the one catalyst that led to Madison's death. And I think we really crave that as a safety mechanism as human beings. I mean, it's why our Hollywood movies are so like, who's the bad guy? And then we root against them. because it's not great when there's a ton of gray area for our storytelling in a lot of ways, unless you're talking about novels and certain other like more highbrow where you really want to get into how complicated things are. But a lot of people have read the book and actually sent me notes saying like, you know, you never, like, there was no conclusion to this book. And then that kind of misses the point, because the point of Madison's story, and the point always was, even in the initial discussions with Madison Holleran's family, that we are trying to make a larger point about how these issues of mental health are playing out among all age groups, specifically among young people, and how there very rarely is one catalyst that we can all then go forward and avoid, but that it often is this swirl of variables at play with them that you can't point to one bad guy, you can't point to one moment. And so there is no quick fix. The fix really then becomes more people having to have the conversation and understand how to talk about it, which of course is harder than just saying like, okay, everybody, like this, you know, she was on this drug and she was abusing it, and this is the one thing, and if we just all avoid that, we'll avoid Madison's fate. Like, there is no easy out like that when it comes to Madison's story.
Exactly. And I thought that you did a great job of not allowing yourself to kind of fall down into one specific rabbit hole. And for listeners, it's important to know Kate was able to go through all of Madison's, you know, text messages and just various communication that gave her insight into Madison's world that otherwise we wouldn't have. And the Holleran family, I mean, kudos to them for allowing you to do that, because I think that really helped you share the rawness of the story. And it is messy, you know, to your point of we want to find the villain. And my second big takeaway from this, and I think it's just because the world I operate in, and it's been my career in terms of digital media and marketing and social media, is that is social media kind of the lighter fluid in all of this? Is it the gas that's thrown on this fire of various things that could be causing the depression, or is it, you know, one of the main causes, and or both? And with social media, I think there's I feel like there's a slow build going on. And having been in this space for the last decade and really worked in it day in, day out intimately and with some very high profile people, and seen the power and the strength and the pros and the cons, I feel like the book that you wrote is, you know, it transcends even just the A-type personality and driven collegiate athlete that Maddie was, and it really impacts all of us if we take a step back and look at that notion of the inside not matching the outside, and the fuel that social media gives that whole scenario. So, imagine, you know, fast forward 5 years, and this in a way it's really gotten out of control, in my opinion, and I don't know what the answers are, but it's definitely been on my mind. And you touched very well on the aspect that social played into Madison's story, and thank you for all the research that you did as well.
Yeah, no, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, I'm actually curious to hear, as someone who's been involved so intimately, as you said, with social media, what has been your takeaway, not just from the book, but over like the last year or two, as more studies have come out about some of the mental health implications for young people, about the amount of time they're spending on Snapchat, and some of it is screen time independent of social media, but a lot of it is like Instagram, Snapchat. What have been your takeaways about why we've gone that direction? Was it inevitable? Do you feel like you have any understanding of how to course correct? I mean, because I'm very far down the path of, I need a break from social media altogether. I need to like downgrade from a smartphone for a little while, just to kind of get my brain back to functioning and firing in a creative way, instead of being so dependent on filling idle time with distraction mechanisms of seeing what other people are doing. But I'm curious kind of where you are in that.
It's it's kind of a bit of a tornado in my mind. I mean, some of the things that have really become apparent to me are this notion that we're all fatigued by it. So many people, you talk about a digital detox, and everybody says, "Me too. I want to go on a cleanse from social." And I actually just recently did, but at the same time, we're addicted. So it's that combination and powerful, juxtaposition of being so fatigued and also addicted. And I start to look at, the chemicals in our brains. We look at digital natives like Madison. She knew nothing else. I mean, that was her world. And in high school, there was Facebook, and growing up, and Snapchat was second nature. It's just a part of their world. But what we have now we have kids, children learning to use technology before they learn to talk. And what that does to our development of our interpersonal skills is really, I believe, where it's starting, and the way we communicate. So even if we remove this phrase called social media, how we communicate's changed. And so that is impacting our serotonin exchange too. And you touched on this in the book, and I thought it was great, talking about college kids or just anyone who texts versus talks to someone on the phone, and the inner workings of our body and physiologically, that's impacting more than we realize. So I think about our physical state, and take, the emotions or feelings are one thing, but also, our literally how our body is functioning is changing. So that's pretty powerful. And then just this notion, especially with young women, but really it's everyone, that we're showing our highlight reels instead of real life. And the comparison, so I can't remember who said this, but someone once said, comparison is the thief of joy. And it's so true. We find ourselves comparing our lives and what we're doing all day, every day, to something that isn't realistic. And it's a slippery slope as well. It's something that I struggle with, because I don't, other than more research, I don't even know where you would start, because this train has left the station, right? We are definitely going 100 miles an hour.
Yeah, and I when I look back at human history, even when we find out perhaps things are detrimental to our health in certain ways, like, when has that ever stopped human beings from partaking?
Mm-hmm.
It's not if more research where, like, even, the new book that came out like a couple weeks ago, iGen, who I quoted in my book, I mean, all of the research showing that the use of smartphones is decreasing young people's percentage, or who are having sex in high school, who are getting their driver's license. Now, things that we usually equate with freedom, this next generation is doing less. And not because now we have a new safer generation, but simply because they are mostly lying in their beds on their phones as their form of socializing with other humans. But even regardless of if we know this information, no point in human history do we ever stop doing things just because we think it's unhealthy. That's not going to be a determining factor for a lot of people about why they do things. We're going to do things because it's pleasurable in the moment, and social media certainly is, and because there's a lot of positive effects of social media in addition to some of the drawbacks that we're seeing. And again, I'm not speaking just about social media, I'm also speaking about screen time in general. And for me, another key point, and could be because Twitter is more of a medium that I use than Snapchat. But and I use this quote in the book, and I think about it all the time. Even we now know more about the world than we ever have before. And we know intimately about everything going on in every corner of the world in a way we didn't have. We know the thoughts of other people, at least the way they express them in whatever medium it is, in a way we never have before. And yet our own ability to influence the outcome of world events, of corners of the world, of other people's thinking remains the same as it always has. I mean, certainly you could say some indication that because we all have our megaphone now that we can connect with people in a way that we haven't before and perhaps like influence people. But I think as we're seeing now, social media as a tool, especially on Twitter, to like truly have dialogue is diminishing. And yet our ability to know and absorb like the outrage of what other people are thinking or the horrors of the world seems to have no bound. And that like lack of balance for me, especially when it comes to on Twitter, is something I'm trying to reconcile with. Like, do I need to know all of this? I don't want to be a shallow human being who's like living under a rock, but like how much of this do I need to know, or how much of this is like an addictive quality of like, well, I have to know more and more, when really like my ability to like exert any influence over that remains static.
Mm-hmm. How much of this do you need to be exposed to, especially when you have if you don't have any influence? Well, one thought I had as I think about, what would change this? What are your thoughts around whether or not celebrity influence and even just trendiness, if it became more trendy not to be on your phone as much, not to be on social as much, or what is acceptable or isn't on social, do you think that would impact, the forces of influence and celebrity?
That's really interesting because Catherine, my partner and I, Catherine Budig, we were watching The Young Pope a couple months ago, the HBO show. I don't know if you watched it. And in The Young Pope, the Pope, played by Jude Law, he never gets on Twitter, doesn't allow the Vatican and their PR team to do any social media for him. And his whole play in all of that was that it would like drive up this curiosity of like, what is the Pope on to, right? Like, why is he doing things differently? He's going off of all these mediums. He doesn't see them as worthwhile. People are more interested. And also it cuts out just the headache of social media. And so I said to Catherine while we're watching it, I was like, see, like if I got off Twitter, like maybe that's what would happen is like I could, like it would be like the front of a movement, not me personally, but like this concept of like getting off Twitter, getting off social media is like now being a statement. And Catherine said to me, she's like, but you're not the Pope, right? So it's like, I probably couldn't do that as a form of like curiosity and as a form of like, oh, I'm going to like go into the wild of the non-social media. So I guess my concern would be that celebrities could do it because they're not going to lose any money from their bottom dollar. In fact, it would probably be seen as like even more intriguing to everybody. Just like when Taylor Swift recently wiped her Twitter and her Instagram, like if she had gone off those completely and it wasn't simply to launch her new album, I think people still would have been fascinated by that in its own way. But I don't know that everyone else would have the accessibility of that option, because for people who don't use it for their livelihood, it would still be like, well, okay, I guess I'm getting off Twitter and that's fine, but nobody's really going to notice. For people who do, you don't have the social capital of a celebrity. So I feel like we're kind of caught there. That's my whole big wide story on that.
No, it's interesting that I totally see your point. It's apples to oranges as far as the celebrity doing something versus just the, all of society. I wonder though, even if it were a set of new ground rules, that enough high profile, very powerful influencers took on, celebrities, athletes, whatever, that almost set some new rules, like unspoken, unofficial. Maybe it's a dream of mine, but
I want to dream the same dream as you.
Okay. Well, I think each platform is different in how they're regulated and their willingness to deal with hate and spam and trolls. But like even Kevin, the co-founder and CEO of Instagram, recently there was this great Wired article about him vowing that he would help make the internet clean again or clean it up. And if we have the heads of these platforms also on board, I think that you're tackling it from both angles then. But yeah, It's interesting to see what's happening. It's like the biggest social experiment we've ever been a part of, because it's so powerful and it can help. We've seen that in Houston with all of the disaster with Hurricane Harvey. It can save lives. These platforms can help so much, but they're also, unfortunately, swaying so much more negative lately.
Have you ever listened to Tristan Harris? He's like an ethicist, like a Google ethicist.
No.
He used to work at Google, and he talks about like the ethics of online programming. Yeah, he was on the Sam Harris podcast, Waking Up. I don't know. I hate to promote another podcast while I'm on your podcast, but
No worries. There are plenty of them.
that's right. I have a podcast, Free Cookies.
Yes, free cookies. Check it out. Kate and Catherine's.
Tristan talks so smartly about how a lot of this might come down to like the big, huge digital players being like Apple and Google. He calls it city planning. Like an Apple's version of city planning is just like how they put their formulate their apps, how they, incorporate Apple News to your feed, literally the roadmap of your online life as designed by Apple. And then as designed by Facebook, as designed by Google. And right now they're set up to basically just hits, whatever gets hits, you get more of. But the problem has been that like base level human instinct, everything that the human being not everything, but some things that the human being like desires are just sort of base level reactionary, like, oh, that upset me. I want to click it. I want to send it to people. I'm upset about it. Or like, that's often what drives to the top. And all of our algorithms within like the city planning of our online lives are driven by this metric instead of by the metric of like, what did you find interesting? It's never driven by that. So his solution, and I don't know how we implement this because people don't want to give up any of their time, would be if Apple at the end of every week, if you agreed for them on your phone to send you a breakdown of like everything you did on the phone, it'd be like, you spent, 42% of your time on Twitter. Are you happy with that? And I would click no. And so maybe Apple redesigns what they show to me. You read these stories. Are you happy with it? No, I'm not happy that I spent 42 minutes on TMZ on Thursday, right? Like, And so everything gets rearranged in your feed and based not on what's clickbait, but based on like what's quote unquote most nourishing. That changes some of it because it's not like any of this inherently doesn't do good work for us and doesn't help us. It's just that it's so addictive to our base level human instinct that what I end up consuming is like upsetting, outrage, like Twitter feuds, and I don't want to be doing that. So some of it could be like a redesigning by the people who design it, but they have to be bought into it. And then it's like, why buy into something when the model is currently so smartly designed to get us our human brains to be addicted? Do you want to break that addiction if that's where the value is?
Right. It's a very interesting concept, and my thought of it immediately goes to, okay, the way the algorithms are set now help generate more activity for advertisers too. And I just kind of think of that cyclical revenue model of, if we kind of had, let's call it a wellness algorithm, a mental wellness that allows us to pick and choose, like you said, will that suffice on the ad side and for the business models of these platforms and huge entities? I don't know. And maybe there's a way then to take it that much further and get the advertisers involved. But yeah, that's interesting. I'm definitely going to check that.
Yeah, you should listen to that episode of Sam Harris with Tristan Harris.
So is there something you've been thinking about doing that now it's time to ask yourself, why not now?
Yeah, actually, I've been living in New York for about 6 years, and I was in Philly before that. And, Catherine and I have just been talking a lot like the last 6 months of like, we don't really want to be living here anymore, but we feel really strongly that it's such a capital for the things that we want to do, and we would be like kind of like cutting our legs out from under us if we moved. So that's the big thing right now. And we're people who are like, we don't want to be slaves to that thinking, but it's really hard for us to make that decision because we're both so career oriented. So how could we, because she lives in Charleston, South Carolina, and has a house there, like, how could we leave New York where, we could book a podcast anytime and like swoop into the studio and do it. And like, if there was something we got requested, like take care of it and just hop the subway and be somewhere like Charleston where there's a great food scene, but you're a good plane ride away from where you need to be.
Right, right. So has this been a building kind of question, or did something specifically make you take this thought and consider it a little more seriously?
It was really a question of us having goals independently that we wanted to achieve. And then even if we hit them, not really taking enough satisfaction in it. And really noticing that the balance of what made us happy was way too far skewed on the side of variables that we had no control over, as opposed to if a lot of my happiness was fueled from, and I always use this example because I love my dad, like he takes just great pleasure every day in like 3 things, like getting up a cup of coffee in the morning, listening to WFAN, which is a sports radio station in New York. Sorry, there's 4 things. Doing the crossword puzzle and like going for a walk in the afternoon and like looking at birds. In none of those examples is he reliant really on anyone else except maybe my mom to go for the walk with him and the New York Times to produce a newspaper that day. Mm-hmm. So, like, to make those things happen. Like that day will be enjoyable for him most of the time, regardless of what else happens in the day, unless it's something extreme. And we didn't have a setup like that in our lives. Like so much was dependent day in and day out of all of these factors. Like what emails would I get? What would I book? How would my book do? What is my Twitter response to the ESPN show I did? Instead of anything I controlled. And while it certainly isn't New York's fault, I think anybody who's been to New York or lived in New York can understand how it would fuel like a career mentality, and it would make it somewhat harder to like put these pillars in place in your life where you feel like you have some kind of rhythm that you can fulfill every day and be a part of that doesn't rely on outside validation. And so for us, that was kind of the tipping point where we're like, we might need to leave New York to gain some of our like peace of mind and sanity back.
Interesting. Wow. What an interesting just thought process and analysis of too, what brings you joy. And so where are you in the process of deciding, and how do you tackle a decision like this? Is there a system that you use, or what's next?
I mean, I think we're both kind of people where like, once things get talked about out loud and you verbalize what the option could be, being like, Catherine still owns the house in Charleston. When we go down there, we feel more relaxed and in touch with like the next iteration of who we want to be as people, which is maybe taking it down a little bit in terms of all validation being career oriented. Once we start talking about those things, like the outcome of us moving becomes inevitable. It's kind of, and
it manifests type thing.
I'm kind of one of those people, like once I say it out loud, it's not the first time. It's probably the very fact I said it out loud means like it's been perfectly digested in my mind for a very long time, And I think Catherine can be very similar in that way. So, we've got a lot we have to do in New York over the next few months, but after that, next time we do this podcast, it'll be like a more long distance. Wait, where are you based out of? LA?
I'm in South Dakota. It's actually ironic that I live in the forest. I'm the opposite. I'm kind of in the opposite side of what I went from big urban, and I'm in the Charleston version but even more rural.
Yeah, you went for like the ranch in Wyoming version of
I totally did.
Or the ranch in South Dakota, I guess I should say.
And I'm actually from Wyoming. But yes, and there are times where I feel a little too isolated. So it's that whole, the grass is always greener. But options are nice. So maybe it's having a place, keeping places in both, and
yeah,
who knows? Then you got your travel. Well, a couple of rapid fire questions real quick and we'll wrap up. So what keeps you up at night?
Actually, for the longest time, it was a really deep concern of the last 2 years that I had done something wrong in the telling of Madison Holleran's story. I don't have like a specific, fear or concern that jumps back in my life time and time again that keeps me up at night. It usually tends to be a concern that's topical to what I'm doing right then. And so that's the one for me that has been really haunting in a lot of ways. Is one, a concern before showing the manuscript to her parents that I had like miscalculated on something having to do with Madison. Two, that because writing about suicide, talking about suicide is always a tricky endeavor because it's such an evolving field, suicide ethicists, of understanding how to talk about it, how to write about it. I just worried that I had overlooked something about a phrase I'd used, a way I had depicted a certain scene of Madison's life that maybe I'd had a blind spot for that scene, and it was callous or romanticizing suicide in some way. So I had a lot of trouble over the last 2 years. I mean, I'm a very good sleeper, so I wouldn't be up all night. But as I was falling asleep, a lot of times I would just have a lot of anxiety that I was missing something, that I had a blind spot for this book, and that I made a big mistake. Not overall in the book, right? Not the book itself, but like somewhere within it, that I would have been exposed for something that I had done wrong. And that was really troubling for a while.
I can imagine. I mean, a lot of pressure, but also, like you said, the topic being so tricky. Yeah, well, you did a great job, in my opinion. And I hope everybody definitely picks up a copy. What made Maddie run? And next question, pirates or ninjas? Who's tougher?
Ninjas are tougher. Ninjas are definitely tougher, mostly because I loved Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles as a kid.
There you go.
And so I don't know how often you get that answer or how often you ask that question. But
I have never had that answer, and I ask it often. So
yeah. So my moral allegiance to the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles dates back to pre-adolescence. And so therefore, being a massive Michelangelo fan, the answer would be ninjas.
There you go. All right. Fair enough. And what advice would you give to your younger self, especially in that age that Maddie was at as she was entering into college?
The big thing is not feeling like you have to be super strong and have all the answers because now all of a sudden you've told yourself and society has designated you like an adult, right? I think I really fell into that category when I started college. Even though I was struggling, I wasn't as happy as I thought I should be. It wasn't the college experience I thought I should be having, but I almost felt incapable of admitting that I was struggling to the people around me, because it was supposed to be like, aren't I an adult now? Aren't I strong now? Like, I'm out on my own for the first time. How could I possibly then raise my hand and say, actually, in my mind, I'm weak and I'm struggling, even though as we all get older, I think we all realize that that's almost the defining characteristic of being strong, is leaning on others when you need to. But I think that's really hard when you're just coming of age and you have somewhat of a warped sense of what adulthood really means and how you should embody it in the world.
Oh, that's good. That's very interesting. And there isn't some sort of formal break of you're this, now you're that. But at the same time, we kind of do that to ourselves, and society does it too. Wow, that's good. Well, thank you so much for joining me. And I'll make sure to include a link to the book on the site and on the episode page. And I wish you the best.
Thanks, Amy Jo. Appreciate it.
Hey everyone, thanks for listening to the show. Hit me up on social media to let me know what you think. I'm at Amy Jo Martin on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And I want to hear your Why Not Now moments so I can share them on the show. Just send me a note to whynotnow@amyjomartin.com. For show notes and other offers, you can visit amyjomartin.com/whynotnow. And while you're there, don't forget to sign up for my email newsletter for exclusive content and announcements. A big thanks to Rock Salt Music for all of the tunes by the talented John Coggins, and of course a hat tip to Richard Brewer for editing and producing the show. I'll see you next time, and until then, why not now?